Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of TNT, the Twisted New Testament, or Judaism and Christianity, a contrast, or the real reasons why Jews don't believe in Jesus. 2 books by Rabbi Stuart Federow. Amazing works by this handsome young fella. Welcome back, Rabbi. It's always a pleasure having you here.
It's great to be here, always is with you.
Awesome to know. Very cool. So today we decided to bring to light, as if we haven't already, to bring to light the counterfeit money in the world. And in this case, it's going to be counterfeiting or plagiarism, acts that have happened in the New Testament based on what Christians would call the Old Testament. And if you're a Christian watching, it's not called the Old Testament, it's called the TaNaCh, or the TORAH, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, or the Hebrew Scriptures.
And how about just the Bible? Because Jews were calling that collection of texts Ta, Greek for the books,
before,
which is what Bible means in Greek. So we're talking 2,300 years ago.
Wow.
The Jews of Greece were calling this collection of works Ta, the Bible, about 250, 350 years before Jesus was born.
Interesting. Very interesting. Wow. Okay.
A Biblia.
So in front of me are some topics, verses. We're going to discuss these, of course.
Yes, but before we discuss it, let me do a little preliminary.
Okay, sure.
And it's just to remind people of historical truth.
Okay.
And that is the texts that we now call the New Testament, especially the gospel stories, weren't written down until at least 30 to 40 years after Jesus was dead and buried. And some people would say, like John, is 70 years after Jesus was dead and buried. And so what we're dealing with are literature that is at least 2 and maybe as many as 3, possibly even 4 generations after Jesus was dead. Mm-hmm. So the people who wrote these stories, they didn't know everything there was to know or what they needed to know about Jesus. And so they had to make up stories about Jesus. And what was the best model to model the stories about Jesus on? And that's biblical Hebrew scripture stories.
Right.
So
and some of the Gospels used other Gospels to gather their thoughts and to help them write theirs. That's why you see a lot of stories that are similar but not the same. And then some of them they just gave their best recollection. All I can tell you is, like for me, we're talking 30, 40, 50 years after the fact. But for me, I can't tell you what I was doing last year, much less 30 or 40 or 50 years ago.
Right.
So how they pulled that off is going to be me. I mean, people will say, well, they had notes, they kept notes with them, wherever they were.
And for some
journals,
of the stories, that's very true.
And it's very possible, yeah. But
right. But for many of the stories, they had no idea anything. They had no idea what to say about Jesus. So not only did they take from other Gospels, but they also took from the Hebrew Scriptures.
Yeah, right.
The Hebrew Scriptures served as models to invent stories about Jesus. And some of the verses and some of the parallels, shall we say, that we're going to be discussing between Jesus and Moses are going to sound superficial. Mm-hmm. But when you take all of this together, then it becomes a rather large body of what Christians might call circumstantial evidence. But a lot of circumstantial evidence kind of convicts, the guilty. You get enough of the circumstantial evidence, then it becomes pretty obvious what the truth is. And as you'll see, especially when we compare Jesus to Moses, mm-hmm. What they took as a model were the stories about Moses to invent Jesus, to invent about Jesus.
And the people of the New Testament, I mean, the stories had to be somewhat familiar to what they already knew, so that they could be believed, or so it would be believable, right? And so, which is also why a lot of the New Testament concept you see on the receiving end of it at those times were very pagan in thought. Like whenever they called, who was it called? Peter and somebody. sons of thunder. And which is really like, well, that was kind of odd. Where'd it come from? It's because that's the culture. They believed in all these pagan gods and all this other stuff.
And just the idea of a human mother with a god for the father is
Yeah,
Hercules.
right. Yeah, and others as well. There's more than just
So
Hercules, right?
that, and that's why it caught on so heavily in the Greco-Roman world, because they'd heard the stories before.
And so the only way to
So
tie it in with Judaism, because they're going to say, well, that sounds really pagan. We love it, but there's a wait. No, this is about the Old Testament. Let me show you why. Because
right,
just like with Moses and the killing of all the babies,
right,
this happened here
that's
too. So
definitely right, exactly.
that's kind of
And which we may not get into because there's a lot of stuff we want to get into today, but uh, they will try to show Jesus being superior to the story of
sure,
Moses.
right, right.
So, yeah.
Yep. Okay. So, well, with that said, let me put that on the screen and we'll rock it down. So, number one. Yep.
Number one is they're matching Herod with Pharaoh. The story about Moses had a as the antagonist a wicked king, and it was Pharaoh. So they had to write a antagonist that was a wicked king about Jesus, and that became Herod. So Herod is parallel to Moses, is parallel to Pharaoh. They plagiarized the story about Moses with Pharaoh by writing the story about Jesus with Herod. So Exodus chapter 1, verse 8 tells you about the Pharaoh. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who knew not Joseph, and he said to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there befalls us any war, they also join themselves to our enemies and fight against us and get them up out of our land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh store cities of Pitom and Ramses. Okay, so you have the setup in the book of Exodus of an evil king who's going to be persecuting, in this case, Moses and the Jews. And then in Matthew, you have a very similar story, but it's going to be about Herod.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And this is Matthew 2:12, and being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise, take the young child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and be thou there until I bring you word, for Herod seeks the young child to destroy him. And when he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt. So, and again,
Sure
some
sounds
of
the
these
same
are
to me.
obvious.
Yeah, right,
They're kind of obvious, but Pharaoh and Herod.
right.
Okay. You also have the protagonist as an infant. Remember, okay, Moses began his special nature as an infant. So did Jesus. So in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1, and there went a man to the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, daubed it with slime and pitch, and put the child therein, and laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to watch what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. And she had compassion on him and said, this must be one of the Hebrews' children. So again, the story of Moses begins as an infant. So does the story of Jesus. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, and it goes on from there. But please notice that the whole of Matthew is talking about Jesus as a newborn. Okay.
Okay.
The reason that's significant, not necessarily with our discussion tonight, but now, is because the story in Matthew being about Jesus when he was born precludes the idea that the story of Matthew is actually when he was 2 years old. That's neither here nor there.
Right.
Okay. Now we start getting into some really
You know what?
interesting.
Maybe when we get to the end of this, if we can remember, in fact, I'm going to write a note, and I won't edit this out, just leave this in. Maybe we could have maybe a short, very short discussion on where are the missing years of Jesus. That'd be something I'm kind of
Oh,
curious,
yeah.
right? So,
Right.
okay, very good. Go ahead, continue on.
Okay.
So
Okay. So now you're going to get into some details that, at least in my opinion, are clearly plagiarized from the story of Moses. So in the Torah, you have agents of the king who disobey the king, namely the midwives. And in the New Testament story about Jesus, you also have agents of the king that ultimately disobey the king, who is Herod, namely the wise men. So in Exodus chapter 1, verse 15, and the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of which the names of the one was Shiphrah and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men, children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and have saved the men, children alive? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives even come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mightily. So you have the story of the king, namely Pharaoh, wanting to destroy all the kids because one of them would be a Moses, and he gets the midwives on his side, but they do not obey him. Now take a look at Matthew chapter 2, verse 12 and following. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed to their own country another way. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceedingly wroth and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. So the wise men didn't go back to tell Pharaoh where Jesus had been born.
I have a question.
So
I have a question. Is this the only gospel that this account is held in? Do you know?
yes,
So if something of this mass
importance, yes.
and this huge of a genocide of children under 2 years old really happened in the New Testament era, why is it only
Not
one gospel that mentions it, and there's no other record of it happening anywhere in the history of extra biblical sources?
And see, to me, that is greater proof that the authors of the New Testament explicitly, and especially Matthew, plagiarized the story of Moses.
Sure.
Why do I say that?
Mm-hmm.
When you talk to a Christian scholar and they say, how do you distinguish between the four gospels? The first thing they will say is, well, Matthew is the Jewish gospel. What do they mean by that? Matthew was written explicitly to appeal to the Jewish community. That's why all of these stories that are on the birth of Jesus, and that are on the birth of Jesus, okay, reflect Moses, because, like you said earlier, it has to be something that'll be familiar to the people.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
if Matthew is writing to the Jews, then he's going to plagiarize Jewish stories to make the story of Jesus sound familiar. Do you follow what I said?
Yeah. Yep. Otherwise, they
So-
wouldn't have believed it at all. They had to have something to connect a little bit of truth to it, so they could be comfortable with the idea.
So
of
they
it.
could,
Yeah.
well, in Matthew's opinion, it would help convert the Jews to a Christian
Sure.
theology.
Right.
Okay, and that's also why you don't have it in Mark, Luke, and John, because they weren't explicitly writing to the Jews, so they didn't feel it necessary to make up their stories based on Jewish stories, which are Moses. All right. So the next one, okay, and we again, some of these, we just did this one sort of,
Yeah.
but there's a difference between having agents of the king disobey the king and why they were disobeying the king. Okay,
Are we on
this is
we're on number 4?
yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, so in the Torah, there's an evil scheme to kill Moses, namely Pharaoh attempting by drowning the males. Okay, and in the New Testament, there's also an evil scheme to kill the hero, which is Jesus, and that is Herod attempts by killing all the males 2 years of age and under. So again, there's a parallel.
Mm-hmm.
Evil scheme to kill the hero Moses, evil scheme to kill the hero Jesus. So Exodus chapter 1, verse 15. And the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of which the names of the one was Shiphrah and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them upon the stools, if it's a son, kill it. If it's a daughter, make it, let it live. But in Matthew, okay, Herod tries to get the wise men to tell him where the Messiah was supposed to be born, and they don't come back to tell him. Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, you have the killing of those 2 years and under, which is what you have in the second part of Matthew 2:16. Okay. So, and Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, exceedingly wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and all the coasts thereof from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. So first you have agents disobeying the king, and then you have number 4, which is why they were disobeying the king. Pharaoh wanted to kill Moses, and he drowns all the males, and Herod wanted to kill Jesus, and so he kills all the boys 2 years and under.
Yep.
All right. Number 5. Okay. The parallel is Moses flees until the king dies. And in the New Testament, Jesus flees with his parents until the king dies. So Moses flees till the king dies is a reference to Moses fleeing to Canaan after killing the taskmaster to protect the slave. And in the New Testament, the parallel written because of what it says in the Torah about Moses is that when the parents flee until the king dies, when Jesus is born and the family fled to Egypt. So Exodus chapter 2, verse 15 begins the idea. Now, when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of the Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So Pharaoh, what did he hear? He heard that Moses killed the taskmaster, and he killed the taskmaster to protect the Hebrew slave. Mm-hmm. So Moses heard what happened. Pharaoh heard what happened and sought to slay Moses, and Moses flees and goes to Midian. And then in Exodus chapter 4, verse 18, Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, let me go, I pray thee, and return unto my brethren which are in Egypt, and see whether they are yet alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. And the Lord said to Moses in Midian, go return to Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought your life. So Moses stays in Midian, which, by the way, is a little south of Canaan, on the other side of the Sea of Reeds. And when he is told you can now return to Egypt because the men who sought your life are dead. Mm-hmm. Men are dead which sought your life. Okay, now take a look at Matthew chapter 2, verse 13, and you're going to see this parallel between Moses and Jesus. So Matthew 2:13, when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and be thou there till I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. And he arose and he took the young child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt. And then 6 verses later, but when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. Again, It's perfectly parallel to what happened with Moses in Exodus.
Sure, so they basically conflated 2 stories, but it's the same concept.
Same basic idea throughout the New Testament, reflecting ideas that were first presented about Moses in the Hebrew Scriptures.
Right.
Again, they didn't know what to say about Jesus, so they made up their stories based on what happened to Moses.
Yep.
Number 6, in the Torah, Moses goes to the Holy Land from Egypt to Canaan. Moses goes to the Holy Land from Egypt, going to Canaan. When Moses fled from Egypt to Canaan after killing the taskmaster, in the New Testament, Jesus also goes to the Holy Land from Egypt when the baby Jesus goes from Egypt to Nazareth. So Exodus 2:15, now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well, which we already had. And in Matthew, about Jesus, When Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother, go to the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And he arose and took the young child and his mother and came to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee, and he came and dwelt in the city of Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. So again, Moses goes from the Holy Land, goes to the Holy Land from Egypt, and Jesus goes to the Holy Land from Egypt. Again, it's another parallel. They didn't know about Jesus. They made it up based on what happened with Moses.
Yep.
Okay. Number 7. Moses fasted for 40 days and nights in the wilderness, which is Moses on Mount Sinai. And Jesus fasted for 40 days and nights in the wilderness immediately after the baptism. So they're both going into the wilderness and fasting for 40 days. So, and it's simple. Exodus chapter 30, verse 28. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water, and he wrote upon tables the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. Okay, you'll recognize that Exodus 34 is the second set of the 10 commandments.
Nice.
But in Matthew chapter 4, verse 1, then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil, and when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward hungered.
Yep.
So both Moses and Jesus go into the desert, the wilderness, and they don't eat for 40 days and 40 nights. Moses on the mountain, Jesus in the wilderness to be tempted of the devil, which has its own problem, but we're not going to get into that now.
Right.
Okay. 8. Again, some of these are obvious, but when you take the total number of parallels between Moses and Jesus in Exodus and Matthew, then it becomes rather obvious, overwhelming evidence that they plagiarize the story of Moses. So in Moses delivers in the Torah, Moses delivers a law from a mountain, obviously the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
And in the New Testament, Jesus also delivers a law from a mountain, the Sermon on the Mount.
Good one.
Oh, but that's not a law. Well, yes, it is. Read it carefully.
It's the same ideal passage transfer. It's the same passage transfer, same type, right?
Exactly.
Same delivery method was the same.
They're going to say, well, Moses was a type. Moses was a shadow. Well, yeah, why was he a shadow? Because they invented the stories based on Moses about Jesus.
Right, which covered him up.
Exodus 20, verse 18, and all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they moved back and stood afar off. And they said to Moses, you speak with us and we will hear, but let not God speak with us lest we die. You see, Christians, actually a lot of Jews do too, that after the 10th commandment of the 10 commandments, the people couldn't take it anymore. They were not used to having direct revelation from God like Moses. As a matter of fact, read the text, Exodus 20, verse 18. When the people saw the thunder, and they saw the lightning, and they saw the noise of the trumpet, their senses were so jumbled up that they were seeing sound.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? They were hearing the lightning. Their senses were so jumbled up they couldn't take it. And so they backed away from the mountain. And they said to Moses, hey, Moses, you're used to this, but we can't take this. So from now on, we'll do the law, but let the law come through you from God. You speak to us, or else if it was God who continues speaking to us, we can't take it anymore, we might die. So here we have Moses delivering the rest of the law from the mountain. It didn't stop with 10 commandments. It kept going, but now they came through Moses. And now we have what in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, and it goes on from there. So Moses delivers a law from a mountain, and Jesus delivers a law from a mountain. So these are 8 instances where the Christian New Testament is taking these 8 elements and formulating a story about Jesus to reflect what they got from about Moses from the Hebrew Scriptures.
Right.
Okay. Now, you have other parallels, okay, and that is Shavuot and Pentecost. And William, you're going to have to help me with this.
Okay.
Okay. So Exodus chapter 19, verse 16. Well, that's Mount Sinai. We just read about it. Okay. And it came to pass on the 3rd day in the morning, there was thundering and lightning, the cloud on the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so all the people that was in the camp trembled. Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount, and Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. So you have the scene of Moses on Mount Sinai together with fire and smoke. Okay. And then you have the holiday celebrating what the events of Mount Sinai, which is Shavuot, where you count the 49 days and then the 49 days, 7 times 7 days, the 49th day, then the 50th day becomes Shavuot. Okay. Which in Christianity is Pentecost.
Right.
So Leviticus 23, verse 15, you shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day after they brought the sheaf of the wave offering. 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number 50 days, and you shall offer a new meat offering to the Eternal. So you have the Mount Sinai scene, and then you have in Leviticus the establishment of the holiday commemorating that event. Okay. Now what does it say in the book of Acts about Pentecost? Pentecost, 50th day. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. So again, you have like the fire of the mountain on Pentecost, but now coming to the disciples so that they can speak in tongues and all of the supposed gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the whole issue is they didn't know anything to say about Jesus, so they paralleled it. They
Right.
invented their stories from what they found in the Bible, in the Torah. Okay. And then finally, and this there's another application of this, William,
Okay.
and that is that Jesus resurrected, therefore he's the Messiah.
Yeah. Right.
Well, so did the boy and Elisha. Okay, resurrect children, resurrect people from the dead. That didn't mean the people that they resurrected from the dead were the Messiah.
Right.
But be that as it may, that's not our point today.
Right. But Elijah and Elisha also, right?
Right.
Yep.
So 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 21, and he, this is Elijah, stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried unto the Eternal and said, O Eternal, my God, I pray you, let this child's soul come into him again. And the Eternal heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. The child was clearly dead. Okay. The soul had left the child, and Elijah resurrected the boy. And then in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 32, you have the resurrection of by Elisha of a child. So 2 Kings 4:32. And when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead and laid upon his bed, and went in therefore and shut the door upon them twice and prayed unto the Lord. And he went up and lay upon the child and put his mouth upon his mouth and his eyes upon his eyes and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. And he returned and walked in the house to and fro and went up and stretched himself upon him. And the child sneezed 7 times. And the child opened his eyes, and he called Gehazi and said, Call this Shunammite. And he called her. And when she was coming to him, he said, Take your son. So Elijah and Elisha resurrect a child who was dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Again, Christians will say, oh, this is a shadow. It's not a shadow, it's a plagiarized story.
Mm-hmm.
John chapter 11, 41. And they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, and they may believe that you have sent me. And when he thus has spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus said unto them, loose him and let him go.
Mm-hmm.
So they say that because Jesus resurrected Lazarus, then he must be God.
Right.
Well, Elijah and Elisha resurrected a child, but that doesn't make them God. It doesn't make Elijah or Elisha God either.
Right.
It doesn't make them the Messiah either.
And before you might say, well, Elisha copied Elijah's story. Well, the thing about it is, everything in the TaNaCh, or everything in the Hebrew Scriptures, which y'all would call the Old Testament, y'all already accept. So there's no reason for us to defend that. What we're trying to do is show you the contrasting difference between, and the similarities, unfortunate similarities from both. And so that's kind of where we're at today.
And they want to say that Elijah and Elisha, that Elisha copied Elijah.
Mm-hmm.
He was his disciple.
Yeah, he learned from him.
He knew him.
Yep.
He knew him. He said, "I'm going to do what he did."
Yeah, I know.
This is the master being the model to the disciple.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the stories about Jesus were not about Jesus's master, where Jesus is the disciple. The stories were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before about people that Jesus never knew, like Elisha knew Elijah.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to say it's the same. I have no problem. To me, it's very different.
So, guys, thank you once again for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss anything. Turn on all notifications. That's where you'll be sure to not miss anything. And we'll catch you on the next round. Take care. Shalom, everybody. Peace.
If you enjoy this channel and the content, and it has changed your life, or perhaps the life of a loved one or a close friend, would you please consider supporting this work? You can click this link and it'll take you directly to my website with the donate button. Or there's a Patreon link and a mailing address for snail mail if you would prefer. If you do donate, please do me a favor and leave me a phone number where I can contact you and thank you properly. I hope you all have a wonderful 2025. Shalom.